Hello and welcome to Inside ETFs. I'm Ramzan Karmali. Today we're looking at Brazilian ETFs and my guest is Stephen Schoenfeld, CEO of MarketVector Indexes. 2023 was a comeback year for Brazilian stocks after 3 years in the doldrums. But so far in 2024, Latin America's biggest market has performed poorly. The MSCI Brazil Index is down heavily this year. And in fact, most Brazilian exchange-traded funds are also lower. Sentiment has been weighed down, to some extent, by what many analysts point to a more interventionist stance by the government in the country's largest companies. Just last month, the boss of Petrobras, Latin America's biggest crude producer, was fired by President Lula and replaced by a former head of the oil and gas regulator. So will this kind of meddling scare investors away? Well, to help answer that and much more, I'm joined by Stephen Schoenfeld from MarketVector Indexes. Stephen, thanks so much for joining us. Well, let's start looking at the economy. The first quarter saw a bit of a bounce back after a pretty sluggish end to 2023. But what's your overall view of the Brazilian economy going forward?
So Brazil continues to have very good fundamentals as an exporter, whether it's agricultural products, iron ore, finished steel, and higher end manufacturing products. However, it's suddenly caught in between the trade tensions between US and China, and in many ways is being forced to pick sides. And that's not a comfortable place for Brazil. They like to have good relations with both. So it's going to be a challenging road ahead.
Now, I mentioned in my introduction there about interventionism by the government. Will this scare many foreign investors away, do you think?
The recent moves on Petrobras, which was not only replacing the head of the company, but also direct government intervention on reducing the dividend, which all investors, local and foreign, count on, was viewed very negatively by the market. This is Brazil's largest company, and it dropped precipitously, and it still hasn't recovered. I think the fears are quite real. The finance minister is more moderate, but the PT is really in power, and this is their approach at the moment.
Now, the MSCI Brazil Index has a PE ratio around half of other emerging markets. Does that make Brazil cheap?
So there's an old saying by Brazil watchers, Brazil is the country of the future, and it will always be so. But the fact is that Brazilian valuations are really low. Not for a good reason. There's fear. But if you look at how India and China and other large emerging markets have performed this year, including Korea as well, and Taiwan, Brazil has underperformed. And historically, somewhere after a period of underperformance, especially with low valuations and a lot of bearishness about the politics, there is a recovery play. I can't tell you it's going to be in the third quarter, but I think it will be in the next 2 or 3 quarters.
Now, the biggest Brazilian ETF is EWZ. Is biggest always best?
So large caps have outperformed in Brazil. Also, globally oriented companies have outperformed. Both the large cap and small cap have done poorly this year. Small cap has done worse. And again, taking my previous thesis, it's always darkest before the dawn. So we do think there's more recovery potential in small caps. In addition, we believe that the valuations and the connection to the domestic economy is better with small caps.
Now, in recent times, we've looked at Chinese ETFs and Indian ETFs. Where would you rank Brazilian ETFs amongst those?
So the first way to look at ranking is relative size. Brazil used to be in the top tier of emerging markets, but because of the growth in Taiwan, in China, in India, it's now substantially smaller. But it's not so small that investors can ignore it. So we believe investors need to have an allocation to Brazil, and we think that we're probably closer to a long-term bottom than a top. So, well, clearly we're not anywhere near a top. So we think investors should have an allocation to Brazilian ETFs.
Now, one ETF that your firm has helped put together is the VanEck Brazil Small Cap ETF. Why do you go for small caps?
So our client VanEck uses our Brazil Small Cap Index. They wanted to differentiate from the large cap ETFs available in the marketplace. In addition, We have several Brazilian clients who use a small cap index that we develop and a domestic exposure index. We feel that this gives better exposure to the real economy in Brazil as that recovers, as opposed to the major exporters.
I just want to pick up on something you said. So overall, for Brazilian ETFs, do you believe we're close to the bottom?
As I said, I think we're closer to the bottom. Maybe we're at the beginning of the end. I wouldn't stick my neck out and say it's going to happen between now and the end of this quarter, or maybe not even the end of the next quarter. But I think by mid-2025, if we look back, we will have seen a bottom.
Stephen Schoenfeld from MarketVector Indexes, many thanks for your thoughts. And that is your look at Brazilian ETFs. I'm Ramzan Karmali, and this is Reuters.